I showed up to my own land and found a 12-foot fence around the perimeter, padlocked shut like I was some kind of trespasser. My livestock were trapped inside, my family couldn't even get in, and the HOA president, Karen, with her smug little smirk, stood on the other side of the gate like she had just conquered enemy territory. "It's for aesthetic consistency," she chirped, as if she hadn't just illegally enclosed private property she didn't even own. The real punchline? They said it was to preserve community standards. Community standards on a 50-acre ranch I bought outright, with no HOA jurisdiction. I could feel my hands tighten into fists, but I smiled. Because I already had a plan. They locked the gate thinking they'd won. What kind of fool fences off land from the guy who owns the only key? What happens when the HOA tries to steal land from a man who can buy the whole neighborhood in cash? I bought my ranch for peace. That's what I told myself when I signed the closing documents on 50 acres of unbroken land, 3 miles outside the nearest neighborhood and well beyond anything you'd consider HOA territory. I wanted a place where the only sounds I'd hear were the wind in the trees and my horses stomping the dirt. Not code enforcement. Not passive-aggressive letters. Not some clipboard-wielding suburban overlord telling me how many inches tall my grass could be. Just freedom. And for the first 6 months, that's exactly what I had. My family and I spent every weekend out there, working the soil, building up the barn, letting my daughter ride our horses across fields so wide you could disappear into them. It was ours. Untouched. Unbothered. And then came Karen. HOA president of a neighborhood I had never even stepped foot in. Apparently, she'd taken it upon herself to form what she called a community integration initiative, a diluted project to expand HOA standards to what she called adjacent rural zones. I was the first test case. She showed up on my property, uninvited, 2 weeks after we installed our new barn roof. Her first words weren't, "Hello," or "Hope you're settling in." They were, "This red paint doesn't meet neighborhood color standards." I blinked. What neighborhood? She gestured vaguely behind her, toward a subdivision a full 3 miles away. "Sunset Meadows," she said proudly, like I should know it. "We're working on standardizing all the surrounding properties into our visual planning district." I told her to leave. Politely the first time. Less politely the second. But she didn't. She kept talking about harmonized perimeter aesthetics and buffer zones for value consistency. Said my livestock pens were an urban-facing visual obstruction. Told me my fence height was inconsistent with suburban line-of-sight policies. I laughed right in her face. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a woman who genuinely believed she could enforce HOA rules on a property not even within her jurisdiction. And when I told her plainly I wasn't part of the HOA and had no intention of joining, she didn't argue. She just smirked. "You'll see," she said, and walked off like she'd just delivered a prophecy. A week later, I got the first letter. Courtesy warning, it read. From the HOA of Sunset Meadows. Claiming my barn roof, fencing, and livestock presence were potential depreciators of local property value. They used words like unsightly, nonconforming, and transitional land use blight. There was no legal backing, of course. No code violation. Just a warning. I tossed it. But they didn't stop. They kept coming. Letters. Notices. A knock on the door from a guy in a cheap blazer who introduced himself as the HOA enforcement liaison. He told me they'd voted to recommend voluntary compliance and that I had 30 days to repaint the barn in an approved color palette. When I refused, they escalated. Karen filed a neighbor grievance with the county. Not a real complaint, just enough to trigger an inspection. Then she started showing up again. Taking photos from the road. Standing at the fence line with a tape measure and a notebook. She even waved once, like we were old friends. Then came the staged community petition, 20 names from her HOA claiming my ranch was a source of visual stress and inconsistent aesthetic influence. It was absurd. But it was working. Local council started asking questions. The county office called me to ask why a residential HOA was filing nuisance reports on agricultural land. I told them flat out, this is harassment. But red tape takes time. And Karen? She was speeding up. She found a way to drag me into their little world without me ever signing a thing. She pressured a neighbor whose land borders mine to agree to an easement alignment initiative. They used it to file paperwork with the Subdivision Land Management Board, paperwork that tried to provisionally include my ranch in a land use recommendation map, which conveniently let them claim my land was within the impact zone of HOA aesthetic policy. Still didn't make it legal, but it gave them something to point at. Something to cite when they showed up again with new demands. This time, they wanted me to remove my windmill. Said it didn't match community silhouette guidelines. I told them again, not part of your HOA. Never was. Never will be. And Karen? She just smiled. We'll see, she said again. That was her favorite line. Like she already knew how this was going to end. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly understand, was that I wasn't just some off-grid hobby farmer with a tractor and a dream. No. My name isn't on a single HOA ledger, but it is on half a dozen landholding LLCs. I'm not poor. I don't answer to a HOA board. I own commercial real estate across 3 counties, have a legal team on retainer, and a standing relationship with the county registrar's office. I just didn't want to use any of that. I didn't want war. I wanted quiet. But Karen didn't care what I wanted. She saw my property as a threat to her control. A blemish on her kingdom. And every letter, every citation, every smug smile was another little attempt to draw blood. I watched it all build, stacking piece by piece like a tower of matchsticks. And I didn't fight it. Not yet. I waited. Let her believe she was winning. Let her build her paper empire high enough that when it all came crashing down, the sound would echo through every hallway of her precious HOA office. Because you don't build fences around a man's peace and call it progress. Not without consequences. And Karen was about to learn the hard way that some lines, once crossed, lead straight into a minefield. I came back from a weekend trip to find a wall. Not a metaphorical one. Not a bureaucratic one. An actual, physical, 12-foot-tall steel-posted privacy fence stretching in a perfect box around the outer perimeter of my ranch. I stopped my truck in the middle of the dirt road, jaw locked, heart pounding so hard it hurt my ribs. There was a brand new gate at the front entrance, industrial grade, with a magnetic keypad and a chain-welded lockbox over where my old padlock used to be. It was like coming home to find your house encased in concrete, like someone had tried to erase you with architecture. And standing there, in front of the gate, clipboard in hand, was Karen. "You're trespassing," she said before I even opened my door. "This is a restricted access perimeter authorized under Community Emergency Easement Initiative Article 17. I stared at her, not moving, not speaking, just trying to process how the hell this had even happened. She tapped her clipboard like it was a badge. "There have been too many incidents of non-compliant activity," she said. "We had no choice." I stepped out of my truck and walked right up to the gate. "Karen," I said slowly, "you fenced off my land." She didn't flinch. "It's a protective measure. Temporary, of course. For the benefit of the neighborhood." I looked at the steel fence that now caged my horses. I looked at my house, just barely visible through the slats. My daughter's swing hanging still in the wind. My father's old truck stuck on the wrong side. "Who gave you the authority to do this?" I asked. "The board voted," she said. "And we notified you. You think a mailed pamphlet and a one-sided vote gives you the right to lock me out of my own goddamn property?" I didn't yell. My voice didn't rise. But Karen took a step back all the same. "You'll need to file for an access key," she said, recovering her tone. "We've issued one to the community manager. They'll coordinate gate permissions." I felt a cold, hollow weight settle in my chest. My family couldn't get in. My animals were trapped. My land was boxed like contraband. And the key, the one key, was held by an HOA I never agreed to join. I walked the full perimeter. For straight hours of hiking in the dirt, checking post depth, fence anchors, padlocks, motion sensors. There were cameras. Small ones, hidden in the corners, watching. Karen had turned my home into a prison, then had the audacity to tell me it was for my protection. The next morning, I got an envelope in the mail. Not just one. A stack. Each one from the HOA. Each one more absurd than the last. One cited me for neglected perimeter aesthetics. Another for failing to respond to access control coordination. The third one, the real kicker, fined me $500 for every day I didn't apply for a gate access permit. My land. My gate. My damn ranch. And they were charging me to enter it. I called their office. Got an automated line. Press 2 for violations. Press 5 for compliance officer. Press 9 to leave a message. I left 12. Then I called my lawyer, Elliot. He nearly dropped his coffee when I explained what had happened. "They did what?" he asked. "They fenced in your land? Without easement rights? That's a felony-grade land grab." "That's what I thought," I said. "Can we sue?" "Not yet," he said. "First we need proof they built on land they don't own. Easement rights are tricky. If even one utility line crosses into a shared zone, they'll argue implied jurisdiction. They don't have that," I said. "Everything's off-grid." I made sure of it. "Good," he said. "Start documenting everything. Photos. Videos. Every letter. Every fine. We're going to turn this into Exhibit A. Meanwhile, Karen didn't slow down. She doubled down. A new letter arrived, a $2,500 penalty for unauthorized fence tampering because I'd cut through a section of chicken wire to bring feed to my horses. Another letter banned me from performing unpermitted soil disruption because I tried to dig a new entry path around the fence line. I stopped counting the fines when they passed $25,000. And still, they refused to give me a key. Karen held public meetings in the HOA clubhouse boasting about community perimeter containment like she'd saved the town from an invading army. She printed brochures with aerial photos of my ranch labeling it Provisional Buffer Zone C. She even started circulating rumors that I'd invited squatters onto my land. She told residents the fence was temporary, that it was necessary to protect property values. She posted a notice claiming my livestock posed a risk of pest migration and my house lacked consistent architectural cohesion. I called the sheriff. I filed a report, but they said it was a civil matter. The HOA argued it was community-led boundary reinforcement, a project approved by regional vote. Never mind that the vote was held without my knowledge, and never mind that not a single foot of that fence sat on land zoned under HOA control. But it didn't stop there. They started giving tours. Karen led groups of residents along the fence line like they were visiting a future park. She gestured at my ranch like it was already theirs, talking about conversion potential and shared utility easement transitions. One afternoon, I caught her pointing at my front porch and saying that's where the new event pavilion might go. I should have torn the fence down right then and there. But I didn't. I waited. I documented. I let the violations pile. Because she wasn't just building a fence. She was building evidence. And the higher she stacked her delusions, the harder they were going to collapse when reality hit. The final straw came on a Tuesday. A courier knocked on my temporary trailer door, the only structure I could legally park outside the new fence. He handed me a certified envelope and left without a word. Inside was a notice of debt. $48,500 in cumulative fines. Issued by the HOA. For noncompliance, unauthorized entry, soil disruption, and refusal to coordinate with access control. They said if I didn't pay, they'd pursue asset recovery options, including lien placement and property auction. My hand trembled as I folded the letter. Not with fear, with clarity. Karen wasn't just playing pretend anymore. She believed she owned this land. Believed it so completely that she thought she could steal it, piece by piece, under the cover of bylaws and buzzwords. But what she didn't know, what she would never see coming, was that while she was filing fake citations and faking jurisdiction, I was buying the one piece of land that made her entire scheme possible. Because the one gate they locked me out of, sat on a quarter-acre stretch of land that wasn't owned by the HOA, wasn't even zoned as common space. It was a forgotten holding, left over from an old failed utility corridor, filed under an inactive trust. A holding I now owned. Quietly. Legally. Completely. The one key to the whole fence, and she had no idea it wasn't hers anymore. But she would. Soon. Because Karen hadn't just fenced in my land. She'd fenced herself into a legal disaster. And the lock she used to shut me out? That was about to snap. I cut through the chain with bolt cutters I had to special order from a contractor supply yard 3 towns over. I did it at dawn when the air was still cold enough to bite through denim, when the fields were covered in frost and silence. The lock shattered with one clean bite. The chain clattered to the ground. The gate groaned open like the rusted jaw of a dying beast, and I stepped through onto my land like a man crossing enemy lines to reclaim stolen ground. My boots sank into familiar soil. The horses neighed in the distance. I walked to the house, unhooked the trailer from my truck, and parked back where I belonged. That should have been the end of it. But Karen had a different definition of the word trespassing. 3 hours later, 2 sheriff's deputies rolled up the drive, sirens off but lights still flashing. I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching them approach like I'd been expecting them. Because I had. "You Jacob bro?" one asked, stepping out, hand resting on the butt of his belt. "That's me. We got a call about a potential unlawful entry." I sipped my coffee. "Into what, exactly?" "Property currently under HOA compliance lockout." I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. I just pointed to the sign by the mailbox where the county records number and my name were engraved into a steel plate: Jacob Rowe, owner, private property, no trespassing. The deputy read it, then looked back at me. "The HOA president said this land is under community jurisdiction." "She's wrong. She said you cut a security chain on my gate. Says you're in violation of a lockout agreement. That agreement was filed without legal grounds. And it's not enforceable." He shifted on his feet, clearly uncomfortable. You got proof of that? I handed him a folder. Inside, notarized title deeds, aerial maps, zoning certificates, and most importantly, a letter from the county land office confirming that no HOA boundary included my land, and that no legal easement had ever been granted to Sunset Meadows HOA. He flipped through it in silence. His partner stepped forward, glancing at the documents, then at me. You got any footage of them putting up that fence? I reached into my jacket pocket and handed them a USB. For angles. 2 with audio. Dated, timestamped, and backed up. The second deputy whistled low under his breath. That's solid, he muttered. The first nodded slowly. All right, Mr. Rowe. As far as we're concerned, you're in the clear. Sorry for the trouble. I smiled, just barely. Not your fault. You're not the one trying to play dictator with a picket fence. They left without incident, but not before I saw the unmistakable silhouette of a white SUV watching from the far side of the fence. Karen. She peeled off the second the cruisers pulled away like a roach fleeing the light. The very next morning I got served. A civil complaint, filed by the Sunset Meadows Homeowners Association, claiming I had breached community protocols, defied lawful boundary measures, and most insanely committed intentional and hostile trespass upon restricted community-controlled property. They were suing me for breaking into my own ranch. And that wasn't even the best part. Attached to the filing was a motion requesting temporary restraining orders demanding I cease unauthorized presence on the land until the matter could be reviewed. The audacity was breathtaking, but Elliot was already ahead of them. They just filed a complaint using HOA bylaws on a non-HOA parcel, he said over the phone, voice sharp. They just tried to legally enforce a fake boundary. That's fraud. And you've got footage. So what's the play? I asked. Let them talk. Let them file. We'll respond in court, bury them in real property law, and counterclaim for harassment and illegal property encroachment. How long will it take? A month. Maybe 2. Depends on how loud they scream. I wasn't the only one who noticed. The neighborhood started to murmur. One neighbor, a quiet man named Alan, dropped by and left a note at the gate. Didn't know they were doing this to you. It's wrong. Let me know if you need anything. Another sent an email. Then another. People were starting to turn. Karen had overplayed her hand. What she thought was a power move was becoming a scandal. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. I came home one afternoon to find a printed sign zip-tied to the outside of the fence, under review for community repurposing. Beneath that, private entry prohibited, fines apply. They were now pretending my ranch was public land. They started calling it the Sunset Buffer Project. They held more HOA meetings, talking about shared recreational integration. They even released mock-ups, digital renderings of my ranch turned into a community garden, a walking path, a wedding pavilion. I found them posted in HOA newsletters labeled tentative design drafts. My barn was marked maintenance shed. My house was labeled proposed event rental office. And through it all, Karen kept smiling, kept waving her clipboard like a sword. But she was making a mistake. A fatal one. Because every new piece of propaganda, every post, every lie was more evidence. And Elliot was collecting it all. We sent cease and desist letters. They ignored them. We filed injunction notices. They laughed. And then came the meeting. Karen called an emergency community session in the clubhouse. She invited the press, local reporters, realtors, HOA board members. I wasn't invited, but I showed up anyway. In a suit, with Elliot at my side. Karen was mid-sentence, talking about finalizing the perimeter transition agreement when I walked in and dropped a stack of documents on the table loud enough to stop the room cold. Those agreements are invalid, I said, voice carrying. And every action you've taken is a direct violation of county land code. She stuttered. For the first time, she stuttered. Elliot stepped forward and introduced himself. My client owns the parcel in question. Not Sunset Meadows. Not the HOA. Not the board. Any further action will be met with litigation. Karen tried to interrupt, but the projector on the wall behind her, still displaying my house in pastel overlay, suddenly looked like evidence. I let the silence hang. Let the room breathe in the weight of it. People shifted in their chairs. No one clapped. No one cheered. But they understood. Karen had crossed a line. And I was dragging her back over it, inch by inch. On my terms. With law, not force. With truth, not tantrums. They could call it community planning all they wanted. But what it really was theft. And now they were going to pay for it. Because the trespass wasn't just physical anymore. It was personal. It was financial. And most importantly, it was punishable. The morning the $400,000 fine hit, I was standing in my kitchen stirring coffee, watching a hawk circle over the pasture. Peaceful, ordinary, quiet. Until I heard the soft thunk of an envelope hitting the mat by the door. Certified delivery. HOA letterhead. Red-stamped and triple-bolted. Notice of imminent collection action. Inside was a single-page document, smug and gleaming with absurdity. A detailed invoice. Sunset Meadows Homeowners Association had officially calculated and accrued fines against my property totaling $413,640. The breakdown was a symphony of insanity. $1,000 per day for ongoing noncompliance with visual harmony standards, $2,500 per instance of unauthorized boundary breach, $7,000 for improper maintenance of unintegrated soil surfaces, and a generous $150,000 lump sum for psychological distress and administrative disruption caused to the HOA board. I stared at the page so long it started to blur. Then I laughed. Once. Short and sharp. Because this wasn't incompetence anymore. This was war. Karen wasn't trying to scare me. She was trying to bankrupt me. Bury me in so much fake debt that I'd either give up the land or drown in legal sludge trying to fight it. She wanted the ranch. My house. My barn. All of it. She wanted it repurposed, reformatted, and handed back to the HOA like a prize ribbon. And now she was weaponizing fantasy numbers to make it happen. That same day, she held a town press event on HOA grounds. Not a press conference, mind you, she wasn't official enough for that. Just a few local bloggers, a retired realtor, and someone from a real estate Facebook group that called themselves property influencers. Karen stood at a folding podium and declared her intent to seek redress from non-compliant landowners jeopardizing the tranquility of Sunset Meadows. She named me directly, said I had repeatedly violated the community covenant, and accused me of intentionally damaging community cohesion. Then she held up a laminated poster showing proposed developments for Sunset Civic Ranch, her new name for my ranch. It had everything. A walking trail, a dog park, a performance gazebo. And my barn, my grandfather's hand-built barn, was now labeled as the Sunset Pavilion. She even included an aerial photo, zoomed in and marked with bright yellow arrows. I watched all of it from my phone. Elliot sent the link with the caption, "She's gone full cult." But the worst part came at the bottom of that poster, a small but critical line, pending rezoning approval from County Planning Commission. My stomach dropped. Because that wasn't just a delusion. That was a plan. Karen wasn't just playing pretend anymore. She had filed a request to rezone my private ranch into a mixed-use public space without my signature, without my consent, and without owning a single square inch of the land. She was trying to take it through technicality. Through paperwork. Through lies. Elliot and I drove straight to the county office. We showed them the video, the fines, the drone photos, the whole circus. The zoning commissioner was a tall man named Drury with sunken eyes and the patience of a saint. He listened to everything. Then he looked at me and said, "She submitted this with a forged supporting signature." "Yours?" I blinked. "What?" "Your name. Your parcel number. Your signature." Scanned onto the form. Elliot nearly jumped out of his chair. "That's criminal fraud." Drury nodded. "We'll be launching an investigation. But for now, we'll freeze the request." He handed me a copy of the forged document. My name was there. My exact signature, or something so close it might fool a casual eye. And the word supporting party typed underneath. She was trying to fake my consent. I should have been shocked. But at this point, nothing Karen did could surprise me. What did surprise me was what happened next. The county sent notice to the HOA that the rezoning application had been suspended pending investigation of forged documentation. And instead of backing off, Karen escalated. The very next morning, she called a public vote. A unified action campaign. She told her HOA members that I was actively threatening the neighborhood's safety and property values. She passed a resolution unanimously approved by her pet board to declare my ranch non-citizen managed space. She literally reclassified me as an outsider. Someone operating beyond the covenant of collective land standards. That was her new angle. I was now a rogue element. A security threat. A stain on the harmony of her perfectly planned kingdom. And once that resolution passed, she started pushing to restrict my power at the local level. She sent a petition to the county sheriff requesting law enforcement review of my behavioral pattern of boundary defiance. She mailed letters to nearby HOAs warning them that a belligerent landowner was compromising regional tranquility. And worst of all, she pushed her board to vote on something she called transfer of temporary gate custody. This time she wasn't just threatening. She was coming for the access point. I knew then that she was planning something big. Something final. Something irreversible. I let her build it. Let her draw her own noose with each new document, each new abuse of power, each new delusion printed on HOA letterhead. And while she was doing that, while she was giving interviews, building support, and parading around like she already owned my ranch, I made one last call. Not to Elliot. Not to the sheriff. Not to the zoning board. I called a property holding group I controlled under a different name. A group that owned a certain utility easement lot. A lot that contained a small sliver of dirt road and the only driveway access into the entire fenced ranch. Karen thought it was HOA land. She never checked. Never verified. Because who would think a 20-foot strip of gravel road, cut off from everything else, would be its own parcel? Who would think it was bought years ago as part of a forgotten foreclosure bundle? Me. I thought that. I planned for it. Bought it. Buried it in a trust. And now, as the clock ticked toward Karen's fake deadline and the HOA voted to begin enforcement seizure, I filed a transfer of ownership. To myself. In my name. Publicly. Recorded. Certified. So when they tried to file for entry authorization with the county recorder, it bounced. Rejected. Invalid. Because the gate? The sacred gate they'd locked, controlled, and built an empire around? It was now mine. Fully. Legally. Unarguably. The only way into the ranch. The only path in or out. I walked down to it the next morning. Stood by the keypad. Slid in a new code. Then welded shut the box. When the HOA crew came that afternoon to initiate enforcement access, I handed them a copy of the deed and a certified trespass warning. They stared at it. Then stared at me. This isn't, the lead guy mumbled. It's not HOA property, I said flatly. It hasn't been for 5 years. You've been trespassing since day one. And today it ends. I turned and walked away as they stood there, useless and stunned, locked out of the very gate they tried to use against me. Karen wasn't there. But she would hear about it. And when she did, when she realized the final lock belonged to me, that's when the real collapse would begin. Because this wasn't just legal retaliation anymore. This was a countdown. A fuse lit. And she had no idea how close she was to the blast. The day the gate was officially locked from the outside, from my side, the HOA office turned into a war room. Karen held an emergency crisis session in their pastel-tinted clubhouse, complete with a security consultant, 2 real estate attorneys she'd hired off Craigslist, and an enraged group of HOA loyalists shouting about illegal seizure. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. I had a drone hovering 200 feet up recording everything. That footage, Karen standing at a whiteboard scribbling plans like she was Eisenhower at Normandy, became Exhibit 46 in the court case that followed. But the real damage wasn't done in that clubhouse. It was done with one certified envelope. Inside it, a legal notice prepared by Elliot, stamped by the county recorder and titled in bold letters, Revocation of Shared Access Easement and Notice of Exclusive Use Enforcement. It stated that as the sole owner of Parcel 421, D aka the stretch of dirt the HOA had built their sacred gate upon, I was now revoking all non-resident access. Effective immediately. It cited 3 county ordinances, 1 state property law, and attached a full legal history of the parcel's ownership. It also included a cease and desist for all future entry attempts, along with a $1,000 per incident penalty clause. I delivered the letter myself. Wore a suit. Walked through the HOA office front doors while Karen was still ranting about defensive annexation strategies. She saw me and went silent. You don't belong here, she said. That's the point, I replied. I never did. I placed the envelope on the table, tapped it once, and walked out. She didn't chase me. She didn't even move. Because deep down, I think she knew. She'd lost. That night, her HOA board held a vote to challenge the parcel revocation. I'd already prepared for it. The next morning, I filed a motion for declaratory judgment and injunctive relief. In simple terms, I was taking them to court. But not just for harassment. Not just for illegal fencing. Not just for fraud. I was suing the Sunset Meadows Homeowners Association for $1.25 million in damages, emotional, financial, reputational. And I had receipts. I had every letter. Every fake fine. Every camera they hid on my property. Every quote from Karen's deranged public speeches. Every drone photo. Every video of her pointing at my barn and calling it a civic opportunity. We filed 73 exhibits. And when the court date arrived, it wasn't in the HOA clubhouse. It was in a federal courtroom under a judge who didn't care how many clipboards Karen owned. The courtroom was packed. Not just with lawyers, but with neighbors. Dozens of them. Some curious. Some furious. Many I'd never spoken to. But they'd all seen what Karen did. And now they were here to watch her burn. She came in dressed like a politician, pearl blazer, expression locked in manufactured concern. Her lawyer looked like he hadn't read a single filing. Mine? Elliot came in with a binder thicker than a cinder block. And when the judge asked him to present our opening statement, he did it like a surgeon with a scalpel. Your Honor, Elliot said, this is not merely a case of overreach. This is a case of systemic, coordinated land theft. He walked the court through everything. The fake fines. The false zoning request. The forged signature. The fencing, cameras, harassment, the public smear campaign. They declared my client a trespasser on his own land. They demanded $400,000 in penalties for violations of rules he never agreed to. They installed a physical barrier, blocked emergency access, and faked legal authority to support a campaign of seizure by attrition. Then he dropped the photos of Karen's public mock-ups. The brochures. The interviews. The video of her calling my ranch Sunset Civic Ranch while standing on a map with my name still printed on the parcel. The judge asked Karen's lawyer to respond. He stood, mumbled about community impact, and tried to cite bylaws that didn't apply to me. When the judge asked if they could prove ownership of the gate parcel, he stammered. We were under the impression it was part of our jurisdiction. So you didn't check? The judge asked. Silence. A week later, the ruling dropped. The judge didn't just side with me. He nuked the HOA from orbit. He declared their fines null and void, called their actions reckless and malicious, found them guilty of intentional harassment, unlawful encroachment, fraudulent filings, and attempted fraudulent seizure of property. He awarded me full legal costs, punitive damages, and $600,000 in compensatory payouts. He ordered the fence dismantled under sheriff's supervision. And he personally referred the matter of the forged signature to the district attorney. Karen was no longer just a tyrant. She was now under criminal investigation. I watched from my porch as county crews tore down the fence. It clanged and groaned as it fell, steel bar by steel bar, hauled off in trucks like evidence from a crime scene. The gate, my gate, was the last to go. I kept it, mounted it in my barn. A trophy. The HOA held one final meeting the next week. Not in the clubhouse. In a garage. 6 attendees. Karen wasn't one of them. She'd resigned the day the ruling came in. Disappeared. Packed her bags. Moved to another state. Her house? Sold at a loss. Her reputation? Erased. The HOA tried to limp along, but with half their budget gone to pay my court-ordered damages and the other half now under audit, they collapsed within 3 months. A neighborhood vote dissolved it entirely. Sunset Meadows was no longer a planned community. It was just a street. A bunch of homes. Quiet. Ordinary. Free. I spent the following spring rebuilding. Painted the barn red again. Let my daughter pick wildflowers without fear of clipboards. Set out chairs for a community cookout. The first real gathering that land had ever seen. Nobody talked about HOA policy. Nobody brought up compliance codes. We just grilled steaks, told stories, and laughed. When the sun set that night, the view stretched for miles, no fences, no signs, no borders. Just open land, mine again, finally and fully. And in that silence, in that wide sky fading into stars, I found the peace I bought this ranch for in the first place. Karen thought she could own it with paper. Thought she could rewrite reality with bylaws and signatures and votes. But what she didn't understand is this: land doesn't belong to people who file fake rules. It belongs to those willing to defend it. Inch by inch. Gate by gate. And me? I don't lose ground. Not to anyone.